Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. Today's flight is piloted by Randy Wright, who is joined by his first officer Jeremy Grapenton. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly with the Wright Flyer. Ground traffic control has moved us to the departure lane, so please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, and ensure that all tray tables are stowed in the upright and locked position. We will be taking off shortly, and once again, we'd like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show as we soar above the friendly airwaves in comfort and style.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. This is your captain speaking, and I would like to take this opportunity to personally welcome you to our state-of-the-art radio program. We know you have a choice when it comes to your radio listening pleasure, and would like to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, we're confident that no other radio program or venue will fly you over the friendly airwaves in as much comfort and style, nor leave you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment quite like we can here at the Wright Flyer. Now that you're aboard, please be seated, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. We've taxied to the departure lane and are awaiting takeoff clearance from air traffic control. While they go through that mindless, bureaucratic red tape and regimentation, my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I shall delve into the pre-flight checklist because there is a lot of news and information to get to before we may indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Folks, today's episode will primarily focus on the tragedy that unfurled at Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon. A savage and barbaric killer stole the lives of 9 innocent students whose only offense was attempting to attend class. He specifically targeted those who professed the Christian faith for a particularly brutal execution. In the wake of this senseless and horrific tragedy, the political powers that be have once again chosen to target their usual suspect, an inanimate object, the firearm. We've seen this response time and again after one of these unspeakable tragedies strikes. They don't want to root out the real problem. It's easier to try and attack the right of the people to keep and bear firearms than to address the truly evil among us. That's the thing, folks. They want to attach this to some other abstract characteristic as opposed to the actual motives of the shooters. In the case of the Charleston, South Carolina church shooter, he was motivated by a perceived bias in the media and racial animosity. The former gay TV reporter who killed his colleagues on live television acted out because he thought people were discriminating against him because both he was black and gay. And now there's this deviant who was inspired by the old Irish Republican Army, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party, and by both the Charleston and Virginia shooters. He didn't do this because he supports the right to keep and bear firearms. In fact, no law would prevent him from carrying out his wicked and dastardly deeds. If anything, the fact that Umpqua Community College described itself, as per its website, as a gun-free zone only served to make matters worse. The school took this radical left-wing policy to the extreme. Apparently, they only had one security guard on duty, and he wasn't even allowed to be armed. Thus, we can see that no one on campus had the ability to defend themselves against this deviant's rampage. That's the reality that the radical left refuses to admit. Whenever you attempt to strip law-abiding citizens of their ability to keep and bear firearms, you actually create dangerous situations which result in chaos and carnage.
Well, Randy, I wouldn't even say it's just the laws that they're trying to make are specifically tailored to firearms. That's just the beginning of it. And this is a big if, there was possibly any way that all firearms in the United States were done away with. Illegal to own, illegal to possess, illegal to even put your hands on or carry, so on and so forth. And let's just say that criminals actually obeyed the laws. Those criminals would still seek out other means of carrying out their evil acts. They would use knives, baseball bats, hammers, screwdrivers, whatever the case is. But see, that's a utopian dream for these leftists, these propagandists, and that's what this is propaganda. It goes right back to what Joseph Goebbels said when he wrote his Principles of Propaganda. I'll read a couple of points from it. Point number 13, it says propaganda must be carefully timed. Subpoint A, the communication must reach the audience ahead of competing propaganda. We look at Obama's speech 6 hours after this happened, and his dumbed-down, watery version of the Enabling Act speech, which is exactly what it was, that Hitler gave back in Nazi Germany. That was Obama's version of it. A small portion. He wanted to get that media, that propaganda out there ahead of anybody else. Subpoint B, it says a propaganda campaign must begin at the optimum moment. It's timing of everything with this. Every situation where there's been a shooter, we've seen the left come out and instantly, the first thing out of their mouth, they want to control guns. They want to attach blame to something, they want to make excuses for what happened, and then they ultimately draw it right back down to firearms being the problem. Subpoint C says a propaganda theme must be repeated, but not beyond some point of diminishing effectiveness. Again, every single incident like this we're seeing, it's always been repetition of their propaganda. The following point number 14, says propaganda must label events and people with distinctive phrases and slogans. Subpoint A says they must evoke desired responses which the audience previously possesses. Again, this falls right back into the repetitiveness. We've seen time and time again the instance with George Zimmerman. The media labeled George Zimmerman as a white Hispanic. Distinctive phrases and slogans. Mentally ill. Firearms, assault weapons, military-style weapons. All of these things play into this. Subpoint B of point 14 says they must be capable of being easily learned. We've looked through history and looked at what has happened to our society. The dumbing down of the populace. It makes it easily learnable for them to understand this and something for them to latch on because of the way they present it. Third point of point number 14, subpoint C, says they must be utilized again and again, but only in appropriate situations. You're not going to see an instance where you have all this black-on-black violence in Chicago, the murder rate in Chicago being carried out and raised. They don't speak a word of that because it's not appropriate for them. It's not an appropriate situation for their agenda. And then, of course, they must be boomerang proof, the final point of point number 14, subpoint. For them to be boomerang proof, they have to make it to where it is ineffective for anybody else to try and distort or make it to where their own propaganda comes back to them. Well, I'm sorry, leftists, and your agenda is not boomerang proof because that's what we are for. Everything that you're doing is being brought to light. This does not make it boomerang proof for you. We're taking your propaganda, your agenda, and we are exposing it for what it is. And if you don't like it, too bad. Our listeners, our passengers, I hope they come to grips with this reality and they understand, and I believe they do. We have great listeners. And the American people in general are slowly starting to realize what's really going on. It's just a matter of time before this propaganda campaign that you're running that you've been running for the past 100 years is going to fall on its face. And we're going to be there to make sure that it does.
And you know, Jeremy, this also has a bit of the Saul Alinsky rules for radicals dripping all over it as well, in so much as he said that if ever you had an issue with a political movement, you always try and personify that. And what he meant by that was, if you can personify guns, make guns have human characteristics, then it serves your purpose all the better. And there was a lot to that, because what he's trying to say is that guns should be viewed as humans. And we see this all the time with the type of fear-mongering that the left orchestrates in the immediate aftermath of one of these tragic shootings. People oftentimes forget why our founding fathers decided to include the Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights. I know that we have spoken of this right several times on other shows, but if you stop and think about it for a moment, the Second Amendment is arguably the most important right contained within the Bill of Rights. I say this because it ensures the right of the people to defend themselves against either an intrusive government or a vile individual like the Oregon shooter, and that it also states that that right cannot be infringed. Not even a full 6 hours, as you had mentioned, Jeremy, after this tragedy unfolded, President Obama rushed before the cameras of the salivating mainstream media to chastise America's gun owners and defenders of the Second Amendment. He said that we are collectively responsible for this. In other words, the president is attempting to blame all gun owners and supporters of the Second Amendment here in the United States for this tragedy. He lampooned our belief that allowing more people to be armed would actually make the situation much safer. What's more, he looked directly into the cameras and demanded that we restrict our fundamental, unalienable right to keep and bear firearms under the false pretense that it keeps people safe. Folks, if we willingly give up our unalienable rights for a false sense of security, we deserve neither our liberties nor security. Yet, that's exactly what this current administration wants us to do. This is the reason why we must remain ever vigilant with respect to our God-given rights. Look, these people who were robbed of their lives were primarily targeted for their religious views and beliefs. Did the president even mention this once when he got up to that podium? The answer, of course, is that he did not. You know, school shootings are as bad as they are because they present soft targets. Schools have announced that they are so-called gun-free zones. That instantly sends up a flag to wicked souls like the Oregon shooter. They realize that these places present soft targets, where they are completely aware that people will not have the tools at their disposal to defend themselves. They don't have the courage to face people on even terms. Rather, they have a point they want to get across, and the government's response is to further empower them by depriving and stripping law-abiding citizens of their right to keep and bear arms. And, of course, all this is the principle that they will follow the path of least resistance, much like water. Because if they feel that there's no resistance, that's easier for them to attack people. In other words, they are cowardly, but the government is the one that's empowering them. These radical left-wing ideologues are empowering them with these gun-free zones.
You know, it's amazing when people, would-be criminals, understand that the areas in which they live or would commit their crimes, the residents there are armed. You see the crime rate go down. We look at Florida. When Florida instituted their concealed carry laws and whatnot. Crime rates dropped drastically. Drastically. Where I live, over the past 6 years or so, there have been an influx of individuals obtaining their CPL licenses, just in my county alone. The numbers of licensees has gone up. Now, the crime rate has not gone down. However, it has been marginalized. It's been moved. It's almost segregated to certain areas of the county. It's not a county-wide problem anymore so much. It's shifted. Okay, so the crime rate is still rather high for my city. In fact, the FBI has actually declared the city of Flint to be the highest, to have the highest crime rate, violent crime rate per capita in the country. I believe it's going at least 3 to 5 years now that Flint's held that record. You know, not something to be proud of. But again, it's not just because people are owning firearms and obtaining a CPL. That's not what the problem is. The problem actually falls into other regulations that are implemented, local ordinances, things happening with our police department, our fire department, our local politics, our local governance. It's in shambles, and that is causing people. There's a lot of things that influence individuals to commit crimes. But what I'm getting at here is the vast majority across the board, if you look at it in a grand scheme of things, where there are more firearm owners, there typically is a lower crime rate. The city of Detroit, their police chief, a while back, actually made a public announcement and says that he came out and told, right on television in a press conference, that he's encouraging his residents to arm themselves because of the crime rates. Crime rates in Detroit have actually gone down a little bit because of that. When you have individuals encouraging people to exercise their rights and standing behind them, when you have leaders standing behind the American people and letting them know, hey, I support you in exercising your rights, the would-be criminals seem to kind of, creep back into the darkness and under the rocks that they usually hide under. But when you have instances like Umpqua Community College, who actually had a meeting on whether or not to have armed guards, and they squashed that idea, and then they bolster up, we're a gun-free zone. It's like Randy said, that's an open invitation for sociopathic, evil individuals to act. We have to stop this. Gun-free zones, they're unconstitutional. Absolutely unconstitutional. Why? Because they set the premise for individuals to ultimately be deprived of their right to life because they are not able to defend themselves. Gun control laws create more victims.
They absolutely do. And, there's another thing which has bothered me since the story broke. A good number of people have claimed that Oregon is pretty lax on gun control. However, after doing a bit of digging, I have discovered that Oregon has some pretty strict gun laws, and that they have recently undergone a concerted effort to make those gun laws even more draconian and restrictive. According to the AFP, Oregon had recently strengthened its gun sale laws. The article reported that Oregon, like many Democrat-leaning states, and I'm going to re-emphasize that, Democrat-leaning states, there's a reason that I want to put weight on that, had supposedly gotten frustrated over the alleged political inaction at the federal level. In other words, Oregon was mad that Obama wasn't able to get his way with these unconstitutional measures designed to strip decent, hard-working, law-abiding citizens of their fundamental, unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. And so, what they did is they passed a mandatory background check on all gun purchases, and they also tried to restrict the amount that you could have in magazines, and they pushed for even more gun control. According to attorney Laura Cataletta with the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, this is an extremely anti-Second Amendment group that is headquartered out of California, she stated that Oregon is above average in terms of gun regulation. Yet, as we can see, these gun regulations only led to mass carnage. What's worse about it is that it was completely preventable. If someone on that campus had been armed, this little deviant would not have been able to get as high of a kill count as he did. But let's actually turn to Oregon's revised statutes with respect to gun ownership, and you'll see from this just how dangerous of a situation has been created by these laws. Pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute, Section 166.370, subparagraph 1, any person who intentionally possesses a loaded or unloaded firearm or any other instrument used as a dangerous weapon, boy, that's vague, while in or on a public building shall upon conviction be guilty of a Class C felony. The Oregon statute defines a public building as including any public or private school and any buildings adjacent thereto. As we can see, this law creates what is known as a gun-free zone. The fact that the law creates this danger zone only makes matters worse for the students. I say this because it dictates to deviants like this shooter that the place is an easy target to hit, like Jeremy and I have been saying since the beginning of the show. But that's not how the political powers that be will paint the picture. They will point out that this is a result of having easy access to firearms. Again, they'll attempt to claim that this issue is a mental illness issue, as Jeremy had mentioned earlier, or blame firearms just altogether. Of course, that does nothing to address the real problems which are facing us from these tragic and senseless killings. But for the left, it's never been about facts or reality or truth. It's always been about what sort of emotional manipulation they can get away with to secure more power for the government.
You know, and to make matters worse, when you have supposed laws like that, and I don't even consider them to be laws, for the simple fact that they're in direct violation of the Constitution, they have no standing. So anything that's in contrary to the Constitution has no standing, meaning it's unenforceable, it's void. It cannot exist as law. So I don't even recognize them as being laws. It's nothing more than, again, either facsimiled or typed up, handwritten, however they want to do it. I don't care. It's just verbiage used to propagate and advance their agenda. That's all it is. And to make matters worse, to compound onto this, which is exactly what they always do, it's not just one individual doing this. There's a myriad of individuals, a slew of people that jump right on this bandwagon because they're all in cahoots with each other. Let's take Howard Dean, for example. Recently, Howard Dean made the statement, and I'm paraphrasing, that those that supply these evil people, these social deviants, with these firearms to commit these atrocities, those individuals who supplied them should be held liable. Now, how does that work when these individuals, let's take Adam Lanza, for example, how he acquired those firearms. He shot and killed his own mother so that he would not be restrained by her or impeded by her from taking her firearms and going and shooting up Sandy Hook. Now, according to Howard Dean's logic, his mother should be prosecuted. How do you prosecute somebody that is dead? You can't. It's impossible. Of course, he would say, well, we're talking about firearms manufacturers. Sorry, you can't do that either. That would be like prosecuting General Motors for every single person that's killed in an automobile accident with a General Motors vehicle. How are you going to do that? You cannot prosecute individuals for the crimes and the atrocities that other individuals do with no matter what the product may be. I know. Let's, look at an instance where an individual kills somebody with a claw hammer. Well, let's sue craftsmen. Let's hold them accountable because they made a weapon that was used, or an implement that was used as a weapon to take somebody's life. It's lunacy. Sheer lunacy to even have a thought like that. I guess this is why we know that Howard Dean never substantiated anything, and thank God he was never elected president, because he would be pulling much of the same things that Obama is doing. Obama just happens to be a little bit more charmful with it than Howard Dean. But you have all of these individuals that are working in concert with each other to do this. Why don't they put themselves up to the task of doing something good with their positions and their stature in society? Why don't they go and pay their respects to these victims of senseless violence, to use one of their terms, senseless violence? It is senseless. It's senseless because they're allowed to commit these atrocities because of the senseless and idiotic legislation and gun control measures that create these gun-free zones. They want to do something truthful. They want to do something that impacts this country as far as leadership goes. Get rid of all the gun laws. They're unconstitutional. Why not stop making it easier for criminals to obtain these things and commit these crimes? Gun laws are not going to do that for the American people as far as keeping them safe. The more gun laws you put into play, the more crimes are going to be committed. Why? Again, because it restricts the ability of people to not be victims. You are infringing upon law-abiding citizens, and you're making them out to be victims. All because you have an agenda, because of something hurts your feelings, and you get emotional about something. But yet, at the same time, you want to say guns are bad, but you all surround yourselves with armed guards. That's called hypocrisy. Stop being hypocritical. Stop being hypocritical. Stop lying on both sides of your mouths, and stop propagating the American people and lying to them. Be truthful. You want to be known as a truthful individual? Step up to the plate and let's see some truth. Stop with these lies.
So you mean to tell me that you didn't find it charming when good old Dean stood up there and went "Yarg" back in the '04 election? I think that really was a charming time. It was certainly more intelligent than most of the things that Obama has said, especially relating to gun control. But you're absolutely right that these people are pushing this false narrative, this dishonest and hypocritical narrative, in order to gain more power. But if you sit back and kind of think about what they're trying to do, to create this sort of centralized oligarchy, it makes sense as to why they would want to disarm the decent, honest, hard-working American citizen. It's because they don't want the American citizen to be self-responsible, self-accountable. They want to force everyone to be a serf to the government. And that's been their goal. They're essentially neo-feudalists. But I also want to address the falsehood put forward by the president during his press conference. Again, this is roughly 6 hours after the incident occurred. President Obama is once again up at the podium to spew his diatribe to the mainstream media that's just gobbling it up. They can't get enough of it. But during this supposed press conference, the president claimed that states which have strict gun control policies are much safer than those which allow their citizens to keep and bear arms readily. Of course, he's trying to reference a study that was put out in 2014, which was skewed to make gun homicides appear to be much higher than they really are. This is because those studies included accidental discharge of a firearm, deaths resulting from that, as well as suicides. However, such results do not create an honest and objective picture of what really happens. The best study for that is a study that was put out by Don B. Cates and Gary Mauser from 2007. In Volume 30, Issue Number 2 of the Harvard Law and Public Policy Journal, these authors demonstrated that violent crime and murder, from stabbing, beatings, strangulations, and other forms, are twice as frequent in countries with strict gun control laws than in the United States. And also what they found is that per capita, while gun homicides may be more frequent in the United States, the truth of the matter is, again, per capita, murder in general is half as frequent in the United States than in those other countries who have strict gun control restrictions. Now, Harvard did put out a study back in 2013 where they attempted to state that ready access to firearms doesn't deter crime. But again, violent crimes and murder were shown to be much less frequent. These studies can be skewed to show desired results, much like what we have seen with the so-called climate studies with respect to the hoax known as global warming. Therefore, the more recent studies are suspect. I believe this is due in part to the fact that the radical left in academia do not want to accept the data that numerous studies in the past have shown, because it simply doesn't fit their agenda. Let's not forget that the president also stated that the United States is the only advanced country which seems to suffer from mass shootings. Well, that too is factually incorrect. Just this last summer, there was a horrific shooting by a radical Islamic terrorist that killed numerous unarmed French citizens on a passenger train outside of Paris. Thanks to the brave and selfless efforts of 3 American servicemen, the terrorist was subdued, and his rampage came to a swift end. Despite their valor, they were still placed at unnecessary risk because of France's absurd anti-gun policies. Yet when you look at the left and see what the left is trying to accomplish, they want to emulate places like France. They want America to become more like Europe. When I see that nothing further could be from the truth, nothing further from the truth could be desired. Because if we were to become like Europe, we would become necessarily reliant. And if I'm not mistaken, Europe had a long time where their people were serfs to a controlling oligarchical political elite. We really don't want that in this country, period.
No. Oui. Well, let's go back and look at Europe. The whole reason why the United States came to be was because of that very thing. Because of the British rule. Our founding fathers, especially Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, laid out precisely in the Declaration of Independence the violations against the people. Now, we're seeing history repeat itself, insomuch that we are almost to that point again to where we have a monarchical oligarchy, but we're not quite there yet. Right now, we've only traveled back in time, so to speak, to Nazi Germany, circa 1935, 1938, which was the worst time in Nazi Germany. We're residing in that type of era right now in a political fashion, because we're seeing all of this happen. Now, you mentioned President Obama's speech where he said, where gun control laws are more prevalent, the crime rate is not as much. How's that working in Illinois, his home state? How's it working there? Every weekend for the past 7 months, there's been nothing but mass shootings, people dying. Every single weekend. There have been shootings after shooting after shooting. Illinois is probably, aside from California, one of the most restrictive gun law states. One of the most. Now, if you were to take it, and it's based on per capita again, with Flint, Michigan being the highest violent crime rate in the country per capita, Flint, Michigan has less than 100,000 people. Actually, I think there are between 87 and 93,000 people. How many people does Chicago, Illinois have? More than double that. More than triple that. And they have more violent deaths there because of guns and firearms. Why? It's because of the mentality there. It's because of the influx of criminals, again, who have no regard for the law. They have the most strictest gun laws there. Here in Flint, Michigan, Michigan's an open carry state. It's also a concealed carry state. There is only but a few places here in Michigan where you cannot carry a firearm. Just a few. And in some of those places, you actually can. If you have a CPL license, you can open carry in a public school. Illinois, you can't even do that. You can't even open carry in Illinois. So why is it, if we were to go 1 for 1, or based in, let's say Chicago's population was the same as Flint, guess what? Chicago would actually hold the title of the most violent high crime ridden city in the country. You look at the numbers. So how is it? I don't understand how anybody could even make any kind of coherent sense out of what he said when he made that statement. The only logical explanation for that is, again, reverting back to what Joseph Goebbels said about timing with the propaganda. It's very distinctive in what they're doing and how they are wording these things. Adolf Hitler was an exuberant speaker, magnificent speaker. I'm not giving Hitler any praise, but I'm giving credit where credit is due. He was a great speaker, great public speaker. And Obama has been hailed as a great public speaker. He's charming. The only difference between Obama and Hitler in regard to this is that Hitler had to do it from the ground up. Obama's already had it handed to him. He doesn't have to work at it. All he has to do is be charming. Hitler had to be both persuasive and charming, and put more work into his efforts of obtaining what he wanted to do. Obama doesn't have to do that, because the groundwork's already been laid for him. He's just riding the coattails. And when people understand this, when you, our listeners, and anybody else who hears our shows, when everything starts to set in and you realize it, you'll understand. And this is our hope for everybody, for them to understand what we're bringing to you. We have a United States Constitution that's the supreme law of the land. We, the people, have it. It doesn't belong to the United States. It belongs to the people of the United States. It is ours. And if we allow them to continually attack us in our rights and deprive us of the very thing, the only safeguard that we have to protect the Constitution, that being the Second Amendment, you could say goodbye to your freedom of speech. You could say goodbye to unwarranted illegal searches and seizures under the Fourth Amendment. You could say goodbye to your due process rights under the Fifth Amendment and 14th Amendment, both at the federal and state levels. You'll be put in prison. It'll be cruel and inhumane. It'll violate your Ninth Amendment or your Eighth Amendment rights, so on and so forth. If they've removed the safeguard, the only means of stopping them from destroying the Constitution, you have lost everything. And if we allow this to continue, that's what will happen. Again, it's what Randy said when he quoted Benjamin Franklin. Those that are willing to trade safety for a sense of security, or trade their liberties for sense of security and safety, deserve neither, and will most assuredly lose both. You forfeit your rights to feel safe, you will not be safe, because you're giving up the very means of being able to maintain your safety. Your safety is your rights. Your rights ensure your safety. They create your safety for you. And that's all done with personal responsibility and acknowledgement of what your rights and understanding them and how they are applied and how they should be utilized.
And when you think about people who have come out like Geraldo Rivera, who sat there and said that the Constitution is, and I'm going to paraphrase here, bovine excrement, it just goes to show that these people are divorced from what America really is about, and that they don't like the idea that people are able to care for themselves. Geraldo should probably go back to digging for Capone's vault, because when he opened that, I'm sure that contained just as much as his brains do, which is to say it's absolutely empty. And the fact that Fox News still employs that blowhard is beyond me. It is time for Fox to dump Jerry Rivers. We here on the Wright Flyer are calling for it, because he came out and he said that the Constitution is worthless. This man is supposed to be an attorney, an officer of the court. He has violated his oath of office, and that should not be tolerated. It is clear he's not standing up for the American people, that he is being derelict in his duty, and that he has violated his oath of office, and that is intolerable. But anyway, that is just one point. I want to point out an article which was recently put out by National Review. It was written by Mark Antonio Wright, no relation that I know of, on October 2nd, 2015. Within it, Mr. Wright states that the 1996 gun confiscation law in Australia didn't work. He said that two important questions should be asked and answered. The first is whether the post-Port Arthur laws... Now, let me explain that. Australia went to this gun confiscation laws right after another evil individual ran around shooting tourists, and that was at the Port Arthur area. And anyway, that prompted them to require their citizens to give up their guns in a mandatory buyback. So whenever you hear these people talk about buybacks, it's very reminiscent of what happened in Australia. It's very totalitarian, despotic, and anti-constitutional. But anyway, his question was whether the post-Port Arthur laws lead to clear reduction in gun violence, and secondly, what would an American version of the Australian model look like? Mr. Wright answered both these questions brilliantly. He said that it didn't reduce gun-related crimes in Australia. Quite to the contrary, it actually made violence of all types go up. And that it wouldn't work in the United States. His argument for that is he pointed to the Second Amendment as being a guarantee that the Australian citizens lack. That was why our founding fathers included it in the Constitution, to ensure that we would have the ability to protect ourselves and to act if the government were to ever become despotic. You've got to realize their biggest fear, because the thing that they were fighting the most and fighting hardest against was a strong centralized government. That's what the American Revolution was all about. And they were not fools. They understood that the way that they maintained and won and secured their sovereignty was by being well equipped enough to take on the most powerful military might known to man at the time. So that's exactly why they put the Second Amendment in. And he's absolutely right to point to this aspect, because our founding fathers understood that the best way to ensure a secure and free state was by allowing the people to be armed. You know, the Second Amendment even says as much in its beautifully drafted language. Yet those radicals on the left have done everything within their power to attempt to obfuscate the clear meaning behind the Second Amendment. First, they attempted to claim that it only applied to militias. However, militias cannot and do not have rights. Rather, the right is specifically endowed to the people. It's even clearer with respect to what sort of restrictions can be placed upon the right to keep and bear arms. In fact, the only common sense restriction which is allowable pursuant to the United States Constitution is found within the four corners of the Second Amendment itself, namely, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Period. End of story. That's it. It really is that simple. Of course, that will not satisfy President Obama. Ever since he first assumed the reins of power in the United States, President Obama has completely dedicated himself to the task of stripping law-abiding citizens of their rights to keep and bear arms. This is all part of his plan to fundamentally transform America.
I'm going to take it a step further. When it talks about the militia in the Second Amendment, what these leftists don't understand when they try to obfuscate that is that the people are the militia. Okay? They are the state's militias. They are the Minutemen that stood their ground against the tyrannical advancements of the British Army. In today's standards, the people make up our military. Now, I'm not saying that the militia is the military per se. This is what the left tries to do. They try to say that, well, you can't own these types of firearms, again with the assault weapons ban, trying to say, oh, well, you know, it's military-style weaponry and only the military can have them. Wrong. We, the people, we are the militia. Whether it's the state militias, whether it's the group of individuals that stands to protect the state from other states invading, or an attempt for the federal government to usurp the authority of the states or the people, we are the ones that are the fail-safe. We are the end means. Even in our own military, we make up our own military. If we didn't, our Constitution would not be as worthy as it is. Why? Because what kind of sense does it make to say that, well, you know, we need a military, so let's go ahead and have citizens from other countries that are not United States citizens make up our military? It would be contradictory to the Constitution for that to happen. Because we, the people, are the militia. We make up our military. We make up any and all facets of what would be considered to be a militia. Therefore, because it says the right of the people meaning the United States citizenry, legal citizens of the United States, not these Syrian refugees they want to bring in and try to make citizens, naturalized. No, they cannot be. If they want to come here legally through the proper immigration laws, fine. I have no problem with that. But these individuals that they want to bring in and label them as refugees, so what? They can vote here and have the same rights as you and I? No, that is not acceptable under the Constitution. It is the right of the people to keep and bear arms, and it shall not be infringed. We the people are the military, we are the militia, every single facet in the true sense of the word. It is the only way that it can be. If we allow other entities to come in, other citizens of the world to come in and have that kind of authority, then our Constitution is surely gone. And I say our Constitution, mine and yours. It belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to the government. Rights were not given to us by man, by the government. They were given to us by our Creator. Therefore, it is our Creator that is the only one that can take them away from us. Not man, not the government, not the courts, except in certain circumstances, and that only applies when individuals exercise their rights to infringe upon the rights of other individuals. At that point, it's not free exercising of your rights. You are criminals at that point. When you utilize the Second Amendment to purchase a firearm or to own a firearm or any kind of arm, period, no matter what it is, I don't care if it's a paring knife, and you use that in a malicious fashion to impose your evilness or your will in a malicious criminal intention on another individual, violating their rights, you are a criminal. I don't care what anybody says. Therefore, you are adjudicated by court and you are forfeited your rights. That is the only way that we can keep ourselves in check. That is part of our legal system, and that has actually gone by the wayside, and it's been abused and neglected and not properly imposed.
Right. And it's been a problem that we've been facing for a long time. And, there's another thing that the left always likes to try and say, and that's that our founding fathers couldn't have envisioned guns like assault rifles. And I hate that term. It's really a stupid term. But anyway, to say that our founding fathers couldn't have envisioned that stuff, I'm going to mention something that's rarely mentioned about Benjamin Franklin. He actually wrote up a proposal to have hot air balloons take soldiers up into the air to move them behind enemy lines, where he would put them down behind enemy lines so that they could then conduct reconnaissance and carry out missions. Guess what? That's a paratrooper. He just described what modern airborne armies are. So to sit there and say that our founding fathers couldn't imagine these kinds of guns is absolute malarkey. It is ridiculous. Do these leftists really think that our founding fathers were completely stupid? Well, yes, they do, if you look at what they try and teach about the founding fathers, the revisionist history that they try and spew about the founding fathers. I had a history professor when I was in college who tried to say that George Washington was barely literate, and I challenged him on it, because I said, all right, Professor so-and-so, if he was barely literate, who wrote most of our first-hand accounts of the French and Indian or 7 Years' War? He didn't know. And I said, well, it was George Washington. In fact, his accounts became so popular and were so beautifully written that it became the bestseller, second only to the Bible, in the colonies. And yet, this professor had the gall to stand before the class and attempt to say that George Washington was barely literate. This is the kind of lies and propaganda that they try and spew. Now, there's another article I want to touch on. USA Today put out a piece by Eric Pratt on October 4th, 2015, in which he said that gun control is the problem. Now, I know, it's surprising for USA Today to put out a piece like that, but anyway, he said, violent crimes aren't increasing. Rather, gun-free zones have become open and obvious targets for evil people who are hell-bent on depriving other citizens of their fundamental, unalienable right to life. In fact, Mr. Pratt said that most Americans find it very offensive to hear the president use a tragedy like this and instantly turn it into a political opportunity. Yet, that's exactly what President Obama did. He stated that these issues should be politicized. He doesn't care about the victims who were robbed of their lives. All he cares about is advancing his twisted and extremist agenda, irrespective of the harm it might cause the country. Let's be honest, folks. If more people were armed at this school, where not even the security guard was armed, then perhaps this shooter could have been stopped before the death toll climbed as high as it did. The left doesn't want you to think about this issue, because they would rather advance the authority of big government than ensure that the people are equipped to defend themselves. Folks, that's really what it comes down to. Part of the reason why the Second Amendment is included within the Bill of Rights is to ensure that the American populace is self-reliant. No one has the duty to protect you. That duty is yours. No one else has that. That is your duty, your responsibility, and you can't delegate it. It's not the job of the government, the police, or anyone else to protect your fundamental right to life, or any of your fundamental rights. That's your responsibility. It has always been, and shall always fall squarely upon your own shoulders. That is why Jeremy and I always go back to this point that the American people are the true sovereigns in this country. Authority, and therefore responsibility, rests upon our shoulders. So, whenever the left or the president goes before the cameras and says that we need to implement and adopt so-called common sense gun legislation, what they're actually saying is that they want to chip away at your unalienable right to defend yourself. They want to say that you are not even worth your ability to defend yourself, that you don't deserve your God-given rights, and therefore you don't deserve the right to life, you don't deserve the right to defend yourself, you don't deserve the right to speak, you don't deserve the right to actively participate in your government. They just want the right to control you, and you can sit there and rot for as much as they care. That is all they care about.
Now, I'm going to give Obama a little bit of credit here. And there's one truth that he said that he has actually carried out. When he said that he was going to fundamentally change the United States, he has done that. He's accomplished it. Now, let's look at this. Fundamentally change. He didn't say, I'm going to fundamentally change the United States for the better. And on the flip side, he didn't say, I'm going to fundamentally change it for the worse. He didn't distinguish between good or bad. He just said, I'm going to fundamentally change. He left the American people, he left you and I hanging. Of course, many of us know exactly what he was all about when he was going to do that. The signs were there. The evidence was clear and present that has created this danger when he instituted things such as Fast and Furious. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that started under Bush. No. See, what they don't understand is, did it happen under Bush? Yes, but it was legal. The way it happened under Bush with White Gun was legal. What you have with Fast and Furious and Project Gunrunner, so on and so forth, they lost those firearms. And as a consequence to that, we had Brian Terry, a border agent, killed with a Fast and Furious firearm that fell into the hands of a drug cartel member. Why is it that they want to say, well, this, and they want to create these situations like Fast and Furious in order to do what? To mesmerize people, to fundamentally change their mode of thinking, so they can shift all the blame away from what they're doing. It's sleight of hand. Look at over here what we're doing, but don't pay any attention to this hand over here, because this is where the change is going to come from. Hitler was a masterful genius with this. He did it all the time. Everything Hitler did was done incrementally. It wasn't that it was a fell swoop to where he just decided, we're going to take everybody that we don't believe fits within our agenda and just throw them in concentration camps, death camps, put them in the gas chamber, so on and so forth. No, that happened over a period of time. He fundamentally changed the thinking process of the individuals. And that's exactly what Obama has done. He has created the situation, and again, the groundwork was laid for him. He's just carrying it on. The baton has been passed to him, and he's running with it. When we allow that to continue, it's going to create more change, not for the better. What he wanted to do was fundamentally change the way that the United States was viewed by the world. We are no longer viewed as the world superpower that we once were. We are no longer viewed as the last bastion of hope for people to come and live a fruitful, prosperous, and free life. They want to say that we are because that fits right in with their agenda. But what we really are is we are the laughingstock of the world. France is laughing at us. And folks, that disturbs me deeply when a country like France is laughing at us. Russia has no respect for us. Iran, China, Syria, Egypt, none of them. They have no respect for us. Even our own allies are beginning to turn their backs on us. They're starting to distance themselves from us. And it's because we, the people, have allowed this to happen. We have fallen victim to political correctness. We've fallen victim to revisionist history. We've fallen victim to this terminology called social justice. Because why? Because it's not right for people to do that because it hurts too many people's feelings. You know what? If your feelings are hurt, buy a dog. That's how that works. Don't give up your sovereignty as a free-thinking, free-minded, free individual in this country. The very means of making sure that for our posterity, our future generations, which again go back to the preamble of the Constitution, do we the people do ordain this Constitution to ourselves and to our posterity. It is ours. It belongs to us. It belongs to you. Doesn't belong to them to do what they want with it. And that is what they've fundamentally changed. They've changed the mode of thinking that government is here to help and government knows all. And people want to put others in office because of what? They think they're going to save them. Nobody can save you, folks, in this country as far as being able to stay free but you. We, the people, are the only saviors that we have when it comes to these measures. And I'm not talking about being saved in a religious aspect. I'm talking about being saved in the means of remaining sovereign, remaining the holders of the most authority in this country. And if we allow that, we delegate that to another individual who's running for office. And there are good candidates that are running for office, don't get me wrong. But when people want to take all their eggs and put them in one basket because that individual tells them what they want to hear, instead of them listening to what they need to hear, and they say, well, we have to vote for them because, you know, they're Republican or they're Democrat, and my family's always voted that way. Now you've relinquished that authority. Now you have given it up, and you are expecting somebody else to take responsibility for your life. You don't have the authority to do that. I don't have the authority to do that. None of us have the authority to do that. Our authority cannot, to maintain our own reliance and sovereignty, rests solely with us, and it cannot be given away to anybody else.
And that's because of the unalienable nature of those rights. And that's the root of that word, That's really what it means. It means that it cannot be taken away. It cannot be encroached upon. It cannot be belittled. It cannot be erased by anyone other than the Creator. And that's why Jeremy and I have so often mentioned on other programs, as well as this one, that the United States Constitution is based off of a natural law theory. And it's not even a theory, it's a natural law application. Because if you look at the way in which the Bill of Rights and all of the United States Constitution is applied, it's natural law. It's saying that it's written on the hearts of men. This is the way it's naturally supposed to be. This is the way that a fundamentally free society works. And people like Obama want to push us back to a feudalist-style system, and that's why I call them neo-feudalists. They want the little fiefdoms to be cut out all over this country where they have absolute control over life, death, everything. And that's why they want to control health care. It's not to give people health care. It's because by controlling that, they gain a huge portion of the American economy. Not just the economy, but the power to determine who gets to live and who gets to die based off of who gets what treatment. Folks, if you think that the death panels are not coming, they are. But jumping back to the shooters, there's something else about what these gun grabbers say that should be analyzed closely. They always point to the numbers of gun incidents that occur within the country as if it is some sort of causation. This is the problem. They point to something which is a correlation and somehow attempt to extrapolate that it is therefore a causation. The problem is, correlations are just that. They are numbers that may or may not correspond with the argument being made. However, the only way to solve the problem is to get to causation. That's why court cases always look for causation. That's one of your primary elements in any tort case. You have a duty of care. Was that breached? Okay. Well, after you have breached the duty of care, you have to ask whether that causation, the harm. And that there was actually a harm. But causation is the most important point. Of course, the radical left doesn't want to engage in an open and honest discussion about this. That's why that's why they couch their arguments in numbers which are actually irrelevant to the case at hand. It's intellectually disingenuous to claim that correlations are automatically a causation of the problem. On the other hand, by pointing to the fact that gun-free zones have presented soft targets for those who are determined to wreak havoc and mayhem, that is actually a causation. It is clearly demonstrated in every school shooting that has occurred in the United States over at least the past 2 decades. Again, sadly, the left doesn't want to examine this for what it is. They are committed to their agenda and refuse to see past it. The same is true of President Obama. He has made multiple false statements with respect to his push for greater gun control. He ignores the United States Constitution and continues to push for his agenda. He has pushed for stricter gun control on at least 15 separate occasions in the immediate aftermath of mass shootings since he's taken office. Just as he has with race-based issues, the president is very selective in his push. And this is something that Jeremy had mentioned earlier. He only goes before the mainstream media when he is convinced that it will somehow advance his twisted and radical agenda. Folks, I'm sure you are all as tired of these really worn-out tactics as I am, or as Jeremy is. All the political elites want to do is strip us of the ability to defend ourselves.
I'd like to speak to another causation. See, when Randy mentions that Obama and his elitist kinfolk are ignoring the Constitution, what they are doing is creating the causation to where they are ignoring the American people. This ties right in with the Constitution being owned by we the people. For them to ignore that, they are ignoring our authority. They are ignoring our rights. They are ignoring what the true essence is of what sovereignty really is, with the people and where it lies. Obama's push to have people instituted and placed on the Supreme Court is a perfect example of this. And allowing that to, with their concurring opinions or dissenting opinions for that matter on any court case, to where the ruling was either upheld in the Constitution, by the Constitution, or the ruling violated the Constitution. In every single court case you can look at, for the most part, they've actually gotten it wrong. They were on the opposite side of the Constitution. Why is that? Because their agenda, they want to cause this situation to where you and I and the American people are ignored. Because they have this utopian fallacy of a dream that they are the supreme rulers, that they know what's best for everybody. They want that monarchical sensibility of power. They want to be able to have their thumbs on everybody. They do this incrementally. It's been done for the past 100 years or so. For what? I'll tell you why. Because they're looking at this in terms of having absolute power. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. They speak to the terms of, well, we have to protect the children, so we have to have a gun-free zone. Their mode of thinking is that criminals will actually acknowledge such things as the gun-free zone and say, you know what? Oh, this is a gun-free zone. We can't do our crime here. We can't do it here because it's a gun-free zone. And, the president and all his kinfolk that, are the elitists, they don't want us to do that. You honestly think they care about that? No. They froth at the mouth for a chance like that. That is an open invitation for destruction. Instead of the president coming up to the podium and saying, we need more gun control laws for this and that, for the safety of the people, so on and so forth, why doesn't he come up to the podium and give his condolences to those who lost their lives? Why doesn't he come up to the podium and say, I'm ashamed that this has happened. This should not be happening in our country in this fashion, or at all. Because of gun control laws, this caused this to happen. But he won't do that. Why? Because he is void of any integrity, void of any kind of decency whatsoever, because he has absolute power, or perceived to have absolute power, as the leader of the free world, and it has corrupted him absolutely. I personally believe he was corrupted long before this. He was groomed. And the whole thing pertaining to this, he wants to be genuine. He wants to be transparent. Well, Mr. President, Mr. Obama, why don't you show some genuine effort and go and pay your respects to those victims? You had no problem with sending individuals to Michael Brown's funeral to pay their respects because you claim he was a victim. No. Where's your genuosity, your genuine efforts in this? You don't have it. You won't send anybody to the funerals of those victims. Why? Because it will cut out the legs from under you, and your agenda will be called to the carpet, and it will come crumbling down and fall flat on its face. And I'm going to do everything in my effort to make sure that your agenda of violating people's rights, usurping the authority of the sovereign people, violating the Constitution, I'm going to do whatever I can within my means legally to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Because what he's doing is completely asinine. It's completely disrespectful. He lacks any iota of compassion for the people that have been slaughtered, and just for expressing, in many cases, their religious beliefs. And I remember he had gotten up in front of the microphones before to say that the right to gay marriage, which doesn't really exist anywhere in the Constitution, but he said that religious liberty couldn't trump that. Well, religious liberty was truly trumped here. And the right to life was truly trumped here. And he makes no mention of it, no address of it, no concern, nothing. Instead, he embraces the religion of the Brady campaign, the anti-gun zealots that run across this country. You know, it's interesting. They put out a study there where they said that 8 of 10 states which got the highest homicide rates from this Brady campaign gun violence prevention charts, and of those 10, 8 which have D or F scores have the highest. Now, of course, states in which firearms are allegedly easy to procure are marked as D or F on this chart. But again, this is based off of a correlation and not causation. And the other thing is, the fact that suicide rates and accidental deaths are included in these studies really brings the results into question. Not to mention the fact that the Brady campaign is not something I would consider objective in their approach. After all, they are firmly committed to reducing law-abiding citizens' access to firearms. And now, here's a piece that'll really get your blood boiling, folks. Solomon Jones put out a piece in which he said that white and black lives don't matter when it comes to gun control issues. He claimed that those of us who support the Second Amendment just don't care about people's lives. He also stated that irrespective of what the data states, we, being supporters of the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms, would push for more guns to be available. In his piece with Newsworks, I believe was the site that it came from, he claims that we should adopt bans on assault rifles and high magazine capacities. Honestly, Mr. Jones, what good would this do? It solves nothing. It accomplishes nothing. Look, the shooter was born in Great Britain. That country has one of the strictest gun control laws on earth, yet violent crime continues to be a major problem over there, 2 times what it is over here. What's more, British citizens do not have the Second Amendment rights that we do. They ought to, but they simply don't. The left in this country are making emotionally charged arguments, all while disregarding the facts. Of course, their plans will result with horrific unintended consequences. Think about that for a moment. The fact that the school embraced the left-wing policy of a gun-free zone didn't prevent this sociopath's rampage. Banning guns wouldn't stop him from illegally getting a gun, or finding some other way to run around killing people. After all, bomb threats can become real bombings. Look at the Boston Marathon case. Because the Tsarnaev, the Chechnyan Mario brothers, used pressure cookers to create their bombs, does it follow that we should ban the purchase and sale of pressure cookers? Of course, the answer is no, but following the utopian socialist arguments to their logical conclusion would result in such an ignorant ban being implemented.
You know, situations like this, when you have victims because of idiocy and lunacy and ludicrous measures with gun-free zones, I've made the comments before that as an American citizen, I'm kind of ashamed that I live in a country where this is allowed to be implemented in where it's taking place. Now, we've heard, Michelle Obama say that, for the first time in her life, she's proud to be an American citizen. Really? How proud are you now, knowing that your husband, President Obama, is advocating for more victims to be notched on somebody's belt or bedpost because of stuff like this? See, those victims, they don't feel anything anymore. They're no longer with us in this world. Their pain, their sorrow, their shame that they would feel is gone. So, since I'm ashamed, I'm going to take that burden for them. I'm going to feel their shame. I'll carry it. Because somebody has to. I think we should all carry that shame. Now, I'm not trying to cut we the people down. I'm not trying to cut anybody down here whatsoever with regard to this. Because the fact of the matter is, we the people have allowed these things to transpire and come into existence because we've become complacent. We have ignored history. And it is our fault that we are now condemned to repeat it. And history does repeat itself. Only because we didn't pay attention to it. Go back to Great Britain. One of the reasons why the American Revolutionary War started was because they didn't want the colonists to be armed. They understood that if they were armed, then they would not be able to do the things that they were doing. But the colonists refused to give up their arms. Thus the revolution ensued. They took down the world's largest military superpower known to man at that time. Then again in 1812, they came back. We were better organized. We had somewhat of a military. It was being built. It was being worked on. And again, we repelled them. Why? Because the inherent understanding of what it means to keep and bear arms, to be able to defend oneself, and the responsibility that's attached to that, wasn't wavered. It stood firm with the people. Carrying on with the sense of shame and whatnot, feeling ashamed of living in a country that behaves in this fashion. This is not what the Founding Fathers intended. I'm embarrassed and ashamed because our country has become what it is. And I know I'm not alone in that feeling. We certainly know that the powers that be, the elitists, the left, the Democrats, we know they're not going to feel any remorse on this whatsoever. They don't care. Again, they are ignoring the Constitution, which ultimately is the causation of them ignoring us. Casting us aside as if we don't matter. And using terminology like Black Lives Matter, so on and so forth. It's ludicrous. And until we realize that, until we, the people, do something about it, until we recognize and fully understand what's at stake here, it will continue.
And in an unabated fashion. And this ties into something that I also saw on the pile of things to get to. According to Billy Hallowell over there at the Blaze, the family of one of the teenagers seriously injured during the Umpqua College shooting states that despite everything she went through, she and her family still oppose additional gun control measures and remain pro-Second Amendment. This is one of those stories that you won't see on the mainstream media. They don't want to cover this because it goes against everything that they are trying to paint with this. It goes against the typical anti-gun narrative that they have been working on incessantly since the shooting broke out last Thursday. And yet, we could all take an example from that brave family and what they went through. They remain adherent to the United States Constitution. And we could all take solace in that. And yes, we can feel the outrage that they have in response to what Obama's trying to do, because it is those very policies that caused this incident in the first place. More of the same is not going to solve anything. And gun control doesn't work. In fact, a Cornell law professor has come out and said that there is a single common denominator among mass shootings. And he went on to state that it has nothing to do with religion or racism. He actually made the point that we have been making during this show, namely, that gun-free zones are the problem. Folks, these wicked individuals act much like water. They're going to follow the path of least resistance. Therefore, when places, particularly schools, are made into gun-free zones, they are just inviting this sort of madness. But will you hear this from the mainstream media? The answer is no. Professor William A. Jacobson attacked gun-free zones for achieving the opposite of their intended purposes in an editorial he published on Sunday's USA Today. He pointed to the fact that the shooter was the only armed person in the building for minutes or longer. Now pause and think about that, folks. For minutes or longer. That's just shocking. Professor Jacobson is absolutely right. These gun-free zones unnecessarily place people's lives at significant risk. Nonetheless, the radical left continues to push for this sort of madness, as if it will somehow cure the problem of these shooting incidents. But it really won't. It exacerbates the problem.
You know, and it's not just gun-free zones. Let's go back to these buyback programs. They're all designed to say, well, you know, if you have this type of weapon or this type of firearm, we'll give you money. The economy is bad enough now, and I hate utilizing the economy as an example of why things happen. Okay? The economy, folks, really doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things, and I'll tell you why. If you do not have your constitutional rights adhered to and followed by those that are elected into office, the economy will always be bad. No matter how good they might think it is, no matter how many jobs they may create, the economy will never flourish to its fullest extent the way that it could. These buyback programs for these firearms, all over the country they've happened. There's an individual that actually helped orchestrate them. Michael Bloomberg, one of the most wealthiest men in the United States, helped orchestrate some of this stuff. He would go to other states, work with people on plans on how to implement them, and even help fund them to buy back these firearms. Why? I would like to know, how many firearms does Michael Bloomberg own? I would like to know that, but I don't have any business knowing that. Why? Because I don't have the right to know that. He has the right to own firearms. It's nobody's business how many firearms anybody else owns, or what type of firearm they own. Michael Bloomberg would say that exact same thing. I own guns, but I don't have to tell you whether or not I own guns, or how many I have, or what kind. And he would be able to be, he would be exonerated for that, and absolved of any ridicule or criticism. Why? Because of his stature. Because of who he is as an elitist. He's an anti-Second Amendment rectal aperture, as my dad would call him. So, having individuals like that want to influence gun control legislation and influx different things into society, like gun buyback programs, or no gun zones, gun-free zones, so on and so forth. They're part of the problem. And when we allow those individuals to continue to be part of the problem, if we allow them to have a platform in which they can speak, they're going to continue to do these things. We, the people who hold the Constitution as the greatest document ever written by man. People would say, well, no, that was the Bible. No. The Bible was not written by man. It was written by God. That's why it's called the Word of God. But the United States Constitution is the most relevant and the highest document that it was ever written by man, and it holds the most authority. If other countries had any resemblance of a document even close to the United States, I'm willing to bet that they would actually cherish it. They would require their students and their citizenry to understand it, to know it, to act on it. That hasn't happened here. That's been taken away from us. And it's because of our own doing. We've allowed it to be taken from us. We've allowed it to be placed along the wayside, and it's becoming less and less relevant instead of being viewed as the greatest document ever written on the face of this earth by man that exuberates and exemplifies what true individualism and liberty and freedom really is.
You know, it's the longest continuously running constitution in the history of man. That just bears repeating. It is the longest continuously running constitution in the history of the world. And there's something to be said for that. And, you know, that's why it's so insulting when President Obama got up there and called those who defend the Second Amendment absolutists, as if we are the same as King Louis XV in absolutist France. He called us crackpots. Well, apparently Obama has trouble with reading comprehension. Defending the Second Amendment must be absolute, because our unalienable rights shall not be infringed. It's put in absolute terms. It's as simple as that. Of course, he tried once again to tie it to himself, because he's such a narcissist. During his Friday press conference, he tried to claim that those of us who support the United States Constitution in general, and the Second Amendment in particular, see this as a plot for him to stay in power forever. Well, it wouldn't be the first time that a dictator has stripped a population of its right to keep and bear firearms in order to solidify his dictatorship. I'm guessing Obama is purposefully ignoring Nazi Germany or the rise of Vladimir Lenin in Russia. The fact of the matter is that these dictators did prohibit their citizens from keeping and bearing firearms. They did so because they didn't want their citizens to have the ability to oppose their radical agenda. The same could be said about Obama and his ilk. Obama thought he was being cute with his sarcasm, but the very fact that he would even joke about something like that clearly suggests that the thought has at least crossed his mind. Our founding fathers included the Second Amendment within the Bill of Rights to ensure that we would be protected from such despotism. So, while President Obama might think it is radical to fear such things, our founding fathers did not. And, to be completely honest, I know for a fact our founding fathers had a much better understanding of the world than the current commander-in-chief. Folks, we shouldn't forget that this is the president who attempted to politicize everything. He uses these tragedies to the best of his ability. However, his solutions won't solve a blessed thing. He would spread the chaos of gun-free zones, which, as we have already stated on this program, was a significant contributing factor to the tragedy. Again, facts have little to no bearing upon his world outlook. He will do whatever he can to secure more power for himself at the expense of we the people. Obama went on in this same press conference on Friday to call for gun control advocates to push against any candidate who supports the Second Amendment. He claims that they have to become as, quote, radical, close quote, as Second Amendment supporters. The way I see this, folks, is as a direct assault on your liberty, my liberty, Jeremy's liberty, all American citizens' liberties. Obama is frustrated that up until now, he has failed to strip you of your unalienable right to keep and bear arms. But I think it's important that we also remember what Niccolo Machiavelli said in The Prince. And you have to remember that that book was written as a guideline for how to be a good leader. He said that any time a leader strips the people of the right to have their weapons to defend themselves, that leader is dishonoring the people. So every time that Obama's getting up there smirking with his little sarcastic smirk, attempting to belittle our heartfelt concerns over our unalienable rights, which he is attempting to infringe at each and every step of the way, he is dishonoring us. Never forget that. He is dishonoring you. He's dishonoring me, he's dishonoring Jeremy, he's dishonoring the memory of those who were killed because of his radical, lunatic, fringe, left-wing policies.
You know, and this is what I don't understand, and I'm a simplistic kind of guy. If he's going to dishonor the people because he wants to enact this gun control legislation, he wants to violate the Constitution and dishonor everybody, including the victims that fell to the hands of these evil sociopaths of these shootings, all because of that legislation creating the gun-free zones. If you're going to dishonor people, why play games about it? Why not just come right out and just be blatant and bold about it? In fact, here's a suggestion. Next time something like this happens, instead of getting up to a podium and running off at the mouth about gun control this, gun control that, and being sarcastic and thinking you're being cute, why don't you just contact, the Westboro Baptist Church and say, hey, I got an idea. Let's go, since I want to dishonor everybody, including the victims of these shootings, why don't you come with me, all expense paid trip, we'll go to their funerals and we'll go ahead and protest their funerals. And we'll hit a couple of soldiers' funerals on the way. At least then you would show some sort of genuine dishonesty instead of playing games. But you're not going to do that because you think of yourself as the sycophant that you are, the narcissist, to where you think you know what's best for everybody. Why? Because you're President of the United States? A title you surely didn't earn, in my opinion. Because I don't ever recall giving consent for you to govern over me.
Yeah, he hasn't earned it. And folks, there's something else to point out with respect to the gun control hoopla. History shows that it doesn't work. I point to the story of Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. Clyde had a particular love for the Browning automatic rifle, or BAR. Back in the 1930s, this was the standard issue for the military. It was difficult for civilians to obtain, and of course, convicted felons like Clyde weren't even supposed to be able to own firearms. But, like any criminal, the fact that he had broken yet another law meant absolutely nothing to Clyde. He broke into several National Guard armories and procured the BAR for himself. He then modified it by sawing off the barrel, creating what he called a whippet gun. Now, why did I mention Bonnie and Clyde? And what possible impact could this have on today's discussion topic? Well, it goes to show that punishing law-abiding citizens doesn't stop criminals from procuring the tools to carry out their deeds. For some reason, the left never recognizes this. They wrap themselves in the sensationalism of it all and completely disregard the truth. A criminal will always find a way to get the tools he or she needs to carry out his or her criminal act. Banning guns won't stop crime. It won't stop murder. It doesn't even stop shooting deaths. It merely prevents law-abiding citizens from possessing the means to protect themselves. Jeremy and I have often stated here on the Wright Flyer that the reason that the United States has been so successful is the fact that we embrace the notion of self-respect, self-responsibility, and self-accountability. Without this notion, we would lack the free thought and spirit necessary to propel us to even loftier heights. This is why I find what the president said to be so offensive and reprehensible. He thinks we are crackpots for wanting to be able to care for ourselves. He hates the idea that we could live without the need of an omnipotent and intrusive government. Well, I have news for you, Mr. President. We aren't the only ones who feel this way.
You know, this actually kind of reminds me of something that happened during World War II. And the Emperor of Japan, or I believe it was an admiral, I can't remember which, Emperor or Admiral, Yamamoto. Now, Yamamoto understood.
It's Admiral Yamamoto.
Admiral, thank you. Admiral Yamamoto fully understood the United States Second Amendment. Because when he made that quote, to invade the United States would be folly because behind every blade of grass you will find a sniper. Now, someone who carries a prestige title as admiral in a navy or in a military setting that is not part of the United States, and they understand that, why can't our so-called illustrious leaders here in the United States understand it? The whole premise behind it. The thing is, they do understand the premise behind it. They don't care. They don't care because they think that the deals that they made with the devil is going to allow them to perpetuate and raise themselves up to grandiose means. Yamamoto understood it. This is why Japan didn't invade the United States in the way that people would think they were going to.
Yeah, in fact, Yamamoto was educated at some of the same schools that our current political elites today are. He went to Harvard. A lot of people forget that, but he actually did, and that is how he gained a better understanding of the people than any of the other military leaders. He actually went against the prime minister of the time, Edaki Tojo, and basically said that the guy was a moron because by attacking America, and even though he designed and developed the Pearl Harbor attack, he said, I can only guarantee victory for 2 or 3 months. 2 years tops. You are only going to stir a hornet's nest. and awaken a sleeping giant. And that's exactly what they did. And that makes me want to jump back to the argument I made earlier about the numbers being mere correlations as opposed to causations. Think of it this way. Is the car the causation behind drunk driving incidents? Not really. It's a factor. But it's not what caused the accident per se. Rather, it was the operator's inhibitions and inebriation which causes it. The same is true for these shooting incidents. Guns are not magical devices which get up by themselves and run down the street and just start shooting up schools or whatever other building they find in their path. Banning law-abiding citizens from owning firearms wouldn't stop evil people with malicious intentions from acting upon said malicious intent. Just as we don't try and ban alcohol or cars with relation to drunk driving, although we did ban alcohol for a while during Prohibition, that really didn't work. The same should be said and hold true with firearms. But driving is a privilege, as is drinking. The right to keep and bear firearms is an unalienable right. In other words, no government or agency is authorized to strip that away from you. Yet that's exactly what the government and this current administration are attempting to do with these so-called common-sense gun restrictions. Why do they turn to inanimate objects to place the blame for their failed policies? They don't look to the totality of the circumstances to make their point. Rather, they just attempt to march out with feel-good platitudes that are somehow supposed to magically fix a problem that is facing the nation. But the more sinister aspect is they believe that the government should be the overlord of the people, which is completely contrary to the language and spirit of the United States Constitution.
I just thought of a scenario that I guarantee would probably come up somewhere down the line should more and more gun regulations be created. And even if there's cases to where the firearm is solely blamed and the manufacturer of that firearm is the one that's prosecuted rather than the criminal. And here's the situation. You have a child pornographer that gets caught with child pornography on his computer or her computer, and they make the claim that, well, if I didn't have that computer, or if that computer wasn't such and such type of computer, then I wouldn't have access to it. Completely absolving themselves of any blame whatsoever, and I could see it coming. Mark my words, I can see it coming. There will be cases like this, whether it's computer with child pornography, or whether it's drinking and driving, or any other product or inanimate object that is involved in a crime being committed. The manufacturer or the supplier of that will be prosecuted. This is what Howard Dean is calling for. He's already calling for it, as is many individuals. Dianne Feinstein has called for this. Barbara Boxer. Joe Biden, not so much, but hey, he advocates the Second Amendment, but he only wants you to have a double-barrel shotgun. And he doesn't even want you to use it with its full intended purpose. He just wants you to walk out of your home with it and fire 2 rounds as warning shots. Hopefully that will convince the intruder, who's more than likely armed, to flee the scene. No, what that intruder is going to do is find you, kill you, and then take your firearm and use it in the commission of another felony or another crime. Meanwhile, the 2 shots you fired up into the air, guess what? They're going to come down and potentially injure somebody else who's innocent. So now Joe Biden is advocating that people are reckless, engage in reckless behavior that is completely 180 degrees opposite of what gun safety is, but yet they want gun safety laws. How does that work? Where's the logic in that? I can see it coming now. Things are going to get much worse. This is part of the reason why our legal system is in shambles. It's been abused, neglected, and torn away from the confines and the rudimentary foundational building blocks of what law is because of manipulative individuals and frivolous lawsuits such as that. And again, folks, this is all done by design. It's one of the many, many, many tentacles that we've talked about regarding breaking down our system of governance, our sovereignty as free people, and tearing away at the Constitution.
Yes, they're absolutely attacking what it means to be an American. The ability to think for ourselves, to be free from governmental intrusion. They make up these lies about the Founding Fathers because they want to discredit them. They want to replace everything that our Founding Fathers stood for with this utopian socialist dream. But what they are passing off as a dream is actually a nightmare. And that is why we here at the Wright Flyer are so adamant about standing up for your constitutional rights, to ensure that the truth is heard, because these propagandists will do everything within their power to strip you of your rights and to force you into the bondage of serfdom to the almighty government. You know, they always say that they're anti-big business, anti-big pharmaceutical, anti-big oil. Why are they never anti-big government? You want to talk about the worst bully out there? It's big government. And if you give up your Second Amendment rights because the government says that's what you need to do, then you are allowing the government to become the complete and total master over every aspect of your life, and they will be unrelenting. That is why we stress the importance of you standing up for your liberties, standing up for your rights, being a self-accountable, self-respectable person. If you live your life in the manner that we are speaking of here, adhering to the principles and foundations of the United States Constitution, you will be a decent individual. You will gain success. You will see what it is to be a rugged individual. And that is what Americans have always prided themselves on. So don't be ashamed of your national heritage and your national identity and what your country has done in the past. Be proud of it. Embrace it. Live every aspect of what the Constitution has granted you. Study it, know it, discuss it. But never be ashamed of the Constitution. If there is anything to be ashamed of, it's as Jeremy said earlier, you need to be ashamed of those who would go out of their way to ensure that your unalienable rights have been encroached upon and that your freedoms are belittled. Because those nefarious governmental actors that would attempt to construe this as government being the supreme arbiter of rights in the United States are the ones that are the greatest danger to you. They sit there and they say that we who love the Constitution are the most likely to be terrorists. No. They say that because they understand that we are acting within the confines of the true government. You cannot have a legitimate government without the United States Constitution, at least not in the United States of America. But they hate the Constitution. They belittle it. They bemoan about it. They whine about it, because they hate the constraints that it places upon them, thereby preventing them from carrying out their wildest dictatorial dreams. But that's why we are here, folks. And as long as there is air in our lungs, we will continue to spout the truth about the Constitution, to stand up for your rights, to let you know what is happening in the world around you. That said, it is time for us to take our dissent. Once again, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and that was my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, with me. We couldn't do this show without you folks, and we are very grateful for having you on board. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Sit back, relax, and join us again next time. We really do appreciate having you here on the Wright Flyer.